My name is Rick Firestone.
My name is Ben Bugale.
And welcome to pixelprojectradio. We are a video game and video game discussions podcast where we analyze and talk through some of our favorite games, some of your favorite games, and just have general conversations about the art of video games. Ben, what are we talking about today?
Rick, we are going to more or less deep dive the living snot. Well, maybe not the living snot, but we're going to take a look at What Remains of Edith Finch. Very excited.
Our second game from Giant Sparrow Studios. And this is another one that we haven't really talked about off air.
It's true, we haven't. And that's something that I very intentionally try not to do, even though I want to. Whenever we talk on the phone, I'm usually like, hey, Rick, I don't want to say anything, but I like this game. This is okay. And then I run away.
Yeah, like any good couple, we keep our true feelings bottled up and we just keep it to pleasantries whenever we're actually interacting.
It's true. It's true. And sometimes we kiss.
Not very much these days, huh, Ben?
No, but after this pandemic's over, you better be ready, boy.
We've joked about that enough on this show that I truly wonder how many people believe that there's something going on. And boy, are they going to be surprised for our next episode whenever our next guest comes on.
They'll be fine. They'll make it through.
But yeah, we are talking about What Remains of Edith Finch, and I think we should just dive right in. Ben, do you want to give your brief summary of how you felt about the game, along with our arbitrary number score?
Arbitrary, patented, copyrighted, everything. We're the only people who do this ever. Did you know that we're the only people in the United States?
We had a thing last week whenever you were gone where I just set it up again since it's the new year, and this is only our second episode doing this year. That is to say, in 2022. And again, the number rankings, we know they're kind of arbitrary. The true meat of the review comes whenever we're actually talking about the game, but it's just a quick and dirty way to get our personal feelings on the game.
Rick, you don't know anybody, buddy. You don't know anyone. This is ours. I've paid money to have it copyrighted. That's not true. No, that's exactly right. This is our opportunity to just give our own personal feelings in a numerical score, because I think we as humans who interpret art, I think we all inherently have this value system. And when it comes to games, the gaming industry has done that for us already numerically. So we're just joining in the fun and making it ours and copywriting it. And don't you dare do this. We are the only people anyway. Yeah, I'll give my couple of sentence, my one sentence with an extra period thrown in review. What Remains of Edith Finch plunges the player into a world that feels all too real, creating a sincere and immersive experience. The story is merciless and forces one into a family that they feel they've belonged in all along, where whimsy and sorrow run side by side. 9.7 out of 10 for me, Rick.
Ooh, this is interesting, and I like some of those adjectives that you're using to describe this tale, merciless in particular, because at a certain point in this, I thought this was going to be a mystery, but it's not.
Same, I thought it too.
It's a tragedy, and handled very well. Let's get through this so we could talk a little bit more specifically. Although not a sequel in the truest sense of the word, a la Shrek 1 to Shrek 2, I believe it to be necessary to play Giant Sparrow's first game, The Unfinished Swan, prior to this one, as it improves upon every aspect set forth there. What Remains of Edith Finch is a tragedy and a meditation on the anxiety of death and the weight of the past that grips the audience from beginning to end. Ben, when I first finished this game, my thoughts on it were sitting somewhere around an 8 out of 10 because I unequivocally liked it, right? It does so much well. And then I started thinking, the few missteps that this game has, would they benefit from a serious revision? And then I thought, no. And the more I think about it, I think this sits at a 10 for me because I can't imagine how it could be improved upon, and it does what it sets out to do especially compared to The Unfinished Swan, so goddamn well.
Rick, I think that's fair to be. If I can be completely candid with you, I really was thinking about making this a 10 out of 10 because I look at it and I'm like, the only thing, Rick, that I want differently of this game is like a little bit more. But it's hard whenever it's already, been curated so well. All of the material, all of the stories, the presentation, the controls, the game practically plays itself.
Before we get into our listener responses, I did want to issue a quick spoiler warning. Typically when we cover these games in the front of the episode, we try to be a little more generic and a little more overarching in how we look at it. But given that this game is primarily storytelling, even talking about the generalities is going to be a bit... it's going to seep a bit into spoiler territory. We're going to do our best not to until we get into the story proper, but just know that going in.
Yeah, no, when we do these games, basically, if you're listening to this and if you've read the title of the episode, you can guarantee that we are going to spoil something. So take this as the two of us lovingly telling you from all time, for all time, that all of these are full of spoilers, so just be ready. And if you would rather play the game and then listen, that's acceptable.
Absolutely, and in some ways it's preferable.
I would agree.
So why don't we get into our listener responses? We're going to start to call for listener responses for the last episode of each month. That's typically going to be the meatiest episode, typically, not always, but typically. And we enjoy hearing from those who enjoy hearing us. That's a good way to say that. So yeah, we were lucky enough to get quite a few responses for this one. And Ben, do you want to take us and start us?
I'm happy to do so, Richard. So I've got this stuff here from is this your friendly neighborhood gamers? The peoples? How many of you are there? I'm scared.
Well, it does say neighborhood gamers, so my inclination is anywhere between 2 and 20.
See, and that's what scares me. It's like Legion in the Bible. Anyway, so they said, this game is incredible. It definitely gave me feelings and made me think.
And they actually sent us a message and asked if they could elaborate, so I'm going to read that elaboration now.
Please.
For me, the first part that is imprinted forever in my mind is the section where you play as the brother who is working in the fish cannery. The way the gameplay tied into how he was creating a fantasy world in his head was masterfully done. As someone who has worked many dead-end/miserable jobs, it was extremely relatable and I could totally see someone going crazy because of it. The other standout is the section where you play as the baby. That part messed me up. It's tragic in general, but I played it right around the time my daughter was born, so it hit differently.
Oof, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough scene. It's handled with care and it's beautifully done, but it's tragic.
Well, and this is where in like my sentence I said whimsy and sorrow side by side, right? Because like it's very blatantly tragic, but they paint it through the eyes of an imaginative child, which is, I mean, we'll obviously get into that as we explore the game together, but that's the beauty of this game is the presentation, and it just, chef's kiss. Maybe even Shrek's kiss.
He's gonna appear in just about every episode ever since we started on that in the Tony Hawk one, huh?
He sees you when you're sleeping.
And he kissed my mom. So this next one comes from Dave from Tales from the Backlog. Dave says, pacing could be an issue in a walking sim, but breaking the game up into multiple bite-sized stories avoids that, and giving each segment its own special type of gameplay helps each segment stand alone in your memory. Some of them are experiences I'll never forget.
I mean, that game kind of hit that way. It was kind of traumatizing in a positive and negative way.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
You said that was Dave from Tales from the Backlog?
Yes.
I like Dave. Hi, Dave. All right, moving on. So then we've got from List Off Podcast. They responded to our question sticker. Played it, loved it, my favorite walking sim, poignant and fantastical. Great word. Fantastical definitely tracks here, I would say.
Well, and poignant as well, because I think poignant gets misused a lot of the times just to mean well-spoken, and it does mean that, but it also implies an air of not negativity, but sadness.
Severity? Okay.
Yeah, severity, sadness, both are accurate. On Twitter, we got one from Masked Llama, aka Spitz. They say, "It hit pretty hard, and I have no offspring. Can't imagine it must hit parents to play this game." Yeah, we obviously don't have offspring. Children, I guess, is the more humanizing way to put that.
There we go.
But yeah, this is a tale of tragedy, and it goes places.
It really does. I've got something here from Wormies. I just love reading that with my human mouth and human brain. Their response was, "I have been obsessed with this game since the day it came out. 1,000 out of 10 would play again, smiley face."
Yeah, Wormies, they had mentioned that they like this game a lot before. I don't quite remember where. It might have been in another poll that we did or something. But yeah, they were the first person that I thought of when I put this message up, so glad you responded.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, for writing in. We'll be doing that more often. And since we largely share your feelings about this game, we're going to jump into it. So a quick elevator pitch on What Remains of Edith Finch before we get into the nitty-gritty of its development and reception. You play as the titular character, Edith Finch, and you are going back to explore your childhood home to uncover the past of your family. That's really the genesis of what this is. It gets more in depth with how it handles various themes and the story, but it is a walking sim where you are uncovering the truths of the past.
Yeah, this game was, like you said, Rick, I thought this game was a mystery. Ho, I was delightfully wrong.
And there was a point about halfway through or so where I thought to myself, I really hope they don't focus too hard on what caused this curse. And it gets to one specific scene where it's about to, and the game purposefully makes it stop in a way that's diegetic. And those things together, I loved that. I loved that they did not dive into whether or not this curse was real, because indeed the curse as a character, if we're going to analyze it that way, its main characteristic is the audience's decision or interpretation as to whether it exists or not. And I'm curious to hear, once we get there, how you interpreted it, Ben.
Well, and I think that's what makes this game cool, is that it's so immersed in this fantasy and this whimsy and this kind of this everything is kind of turned up, right, in the, I don't want to say delusions, but in the minds of some of these characters. And so why, I mean, obviously I think we kind of have a sense as to why, but it's just setting you up to be like, oh, there's a curse and we're going to talk about it, and hard left turn. And it's back to the story. Really, really well written, well executed, well handled by Giant Sparrow and the Annapurna Interactive group. Really good stuff.
Yeah, Giant Sparrow is certainly a name that you may be familiar with, based on our last episode. Well, not our last episode, but a previous episode of The Unfinished Swan. You may also be familiar with the name Ian Dallas. He is the director for What Remains of Edith Finch. I believe, was he the director and writer for The Unfinished Swan?
I believe so. I will look just to make sure.
All right. Well, while you're looking, this was built in the Unreal 4 engine, and it came out in 2017 for PC, PS4, and Xbox One, and it was ported to the Switch in 2019.
Yes, director, writer.
Perfect. Oh, and I guess, I don't know why I spoke it this way. He's also the writer on this one, too. I think it's because director is all the way up top and writer is like solidly in the middle. So I just kind of,
It feels weird that it's there, but yeah.
Especially for this. What did you play this on? PC or Switch?
I played this on PC, though I almost bought it on the Switch, and then I came upstairs to my computer and I said, oh, I already bought this months ago.
Yeah, same. I also played it on PC. Not terribly difficult to run. The way that the art is rendered, it's going to look good generally if you have any sort of modern system. You certainly don't need to be running a 2080 or a 30 series. I didn't really have any bugs.
None on my end either.
Runs like a dream.
It was a very beautiful game to play, to be honest with you. So good.
Before we get into how it looks, because that's next on the talking points, let's talk reception.
Yeah, reception. It received generally positive reviews across all of the platforms. Some really great scores. So just to give you some of those quickly here, Metacritic, and this always drives me a little bit nuts, but I get it. Whenever they have to go through each system, Metacritic gives it on PC an 89 out of 100, 88 for PS4, 92 on Xbox One, and 88 on Nintendo Switch. Whatever. Whereas like Polygon gave it a 9 out of 10, PC Gamer 91, IGN 8.8 out of 10, GameSpot 9 out of 10. I mean, so we're tracking, you and I, on average, quite a bit above these scores, but yeah, they're not bad scores. So there's nobody here is justifying why it was received poorly, online, but yeah, I don't know. I thought it was just a brilliant game. I don't know.
Yeah, that phrase generally positive, I think, is putting it mildly light because this game won a lot of awards. And it was nominated for a lot of awards. It won in 2017 at the Game Awards, Best Narrative. In 2018, it won Best Game, Original Adventure, also Best Lighting and Texture. In 2018 as well, it won the Excellence in Narrative Award at the South by Southwest Gaming Awards, as well as the Best Narrative in the Game Developers Choice Awards. And nominated for much more, as well as winning a few that I didn't mention. Ben, you mentioned some of these scores, like some of the lower ones, like 7 out of 10 and 8.5 out of 10, as not justifying it. The biggest critiques that I found for this game, and I suppose we can address them here, are the lack of gameplay. That is to say, you are just walking and interacting with things. Some of the control schemes feeling a bit clunky, and how the story was handled, particularly at the end. So, first critique, I think we both kind of can toss that out, right?
Which of those things were they?
The first one being that the gameplay was boring.
Oh yeah, no, that is not correct.
Yeah, if you are the type of gamer that only likes to play high-stakes button-pressing games, maybe this isn't for you, but that's akin to going to Taco Bell and expecting like street tacos that you might find in San Antonio. It's just a mismanagement of expectations. Not to diminish this game. That's, perhaps that metaphor wasn't the best, but you know what I mean. The clunkiness of controls I can kind of see. There were a few instances in this where my mouse and my brain and what was happening didn't all agree. Did you feel that way at all?
I mean, a little bit, but once you get in the groove of it and stop thinking and just kind of start doing, it gets a lot easier. So, I mean, I can understand clunkiness a little bit, but I don't know if clunky is exactly a fair word.
It's a bit exaggerated, perhaps, but I understand what they mean.
Yeah.
And then the final critique, the handling of the story at the end, we'll get there, but I want to say up front, I think the story, particularly the conclusion, is brilliant.
it's kind of the only ending it can have.
Yeah. We're both really positive on this. So Ben, you mentioned the visuals. So let's talk about them a little bit. How would you describe this visual style?
That's a really great question. I'm kind of refreshed that they didn't just go like the cell shading route, which, like, don't get me wrong, I like that look, but I'm glad they didn't go that way. It's very Bob's Burgers. You ever watch Bob's Burgers?
Of course.
So Bob's Burgers, right? It's a cartoon, but you never have anything cartoony happen in it. They've basically animated a sitcom. I mean, sure, there's like crazy things that happen, but you don't have like people's eyes falling out of their head or anything like that. This game, though it's very, very clearly a game, there is such an element of that realism. Though visually, at least, it very, again, it's a game, and you're in a world that doesn't exist, and in a lot of intents and purposes shouldn't structurally, that house should not be standing.
Yeah, I think I referred to it as a TARDIS a couple times in my notes.
That's funny. But yeah, no, it has a sense of realism that really draws you in. But again, you never lose sight of the fact that you are playing something, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, one of the descriptors that I thought of as I was playing through this was it presents itself as potpourri. And that comes from something we haven't mentioned yet, which is how this game articulates. This game is essentially a series of vignettes.
Mm-hmm.
And each of these vignettes, not every single one, but a lot of them have very distinctive styles. And it's the graphic designers flirting with creating different landscapes and articulating the stories in different stylistic ways. And all of them, I think, are additive. I didn't think a single one really took me out of the experience.
No, everything to me just made sense. Like, I know we're talking about different stories and playing as different characters, so I'll just jump into that for a second. Like, everything I think is seen in the eyes of the person in a very sincere way. And I think that, just magnifies the storytelling. It's whenever you're like the baby, whenever you're Gregory, right? It's a little bit more colorful and bright and almost silly looking, but it doesn't go too far outside the realm of what has already been established and real. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was great.
Yeah, and just as we move away from the visuals, we mentioned that there's sort of like a series of vignettes. You're not playing through the scenario of every single member of the Finch family. However, you are playing through most of them, and it amounts to, what is it, like 12 scenarios?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13-ish. But it's more like 12, 11.
Did you have a particular favorite?
Oh.
Well, you can say story too, but speaking visually, did you have a favorite? And then did that also track as being your favorite story overall?
Visual and favorite story overall. Do you mind if I outline the Finch family quickly?
Please do.
So, and we'll cover a lot of this in story time. Odin Finch is married to Ingeborg, comes over from, where is it again? Where are these people from? They're from
Norway.
Norway, that's right, because of the Norse mythology. Edie marries Sven and has Edie is Odin's daughter, has Sam, Calvin, Barbara, Molly, and Walter. A lot of these people died very early on. Sam marries Kay. I believe they technically divorce. They give birth to Dawn, Gus, and Gregory. Dawn marries Sanjay, has 3 children with Sanjay, Lewis, Milton, and Edith. So that's the family, and for most of these people, we play their stories, at least the stories that involve their deaths. It's very, very interesting. If I had to say I had a favorite one to play, I'd say my favorite was probably in a lot of ways was Gregory's. I love the fact that it's the bathtub and Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers is playing. It's perfectly ridiculous, but it also is like the mind of a 1-year-old. Like it makes so much sense to me. I liked playing that one, but to my surprise, going through them all, you don't know what's going to hit you the most. Gus's really hit me.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, with the kite and everything, it was really like kind of alarming. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll get into the specifics how each of these stories articulate, but Gus's is very interesting.
What were your two favorites, visually and to play?
I think, well, visually, for me, it had to be Barbara. Barbara's story is articulated as a comic book, so the visuals get very high contrast with outlines. It's actually told via a comic book, so sometimes you go into a particular panel and act it out, and you can kind of see other panels as you're zooming in. And there's a narrator, which, we'll talk about the narrator.
We'll talk about the narrator.
Oh man, the Crypt Keeper, basically. That was my favorite visually. It's hard for me to pick a story that isn't Lewis's as my favorite one.
Interesting.
Lewis's to me was, some of these articulate in a way that, and this is part of the game's design, just so we're clear, some of these articulate in a way that makes it seem like that was very unlucky, or wow, that's that curse got him, there's that curse, this could have been avoided if it weren't for the curse. Lewis's story felt profoundly real, especially given the themes that it deals with in that micro story, and felt just profoundly tragic. I thought that one and Gregory's were probably the two most tragic ones because of how believable they are.
The tragedy of Lewis's, I will say, was particularly piercing. I would agree with that. Might sound weird, I liked listening to his story more than I liked, quote, playing it. Like, it's cool and I get it, but I don't know. I liked basking in his story more and just kind of like processing it, because I am certain that happens to people, like mindset wise, where people go imagining other things in their, in something that is overly repetitious,
So let's talk about the music a little bit, because a lot of these finer story points we will get into as we go through each scenario and each vignette. The music was composed by Jeff Russo. Was that the same person that did The Unfinished Swan, Ben? Do you know?
It was not. I could not tell you who off the top of my head, but I know that it was not him. And I looked that up because of the scene that we will get to, in the game. Different composer.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Jeff Russo, not sure. At least according to Wikipedia, is a member of the American rock band Tonic, which I've never heard of. He did do some composing for some TV and video games. For video games, aside from What Remains of Edith Finch, he also did a little bit of composing for Madden 2018.
Yes.
Which was a little interesting. And then some TV things such as Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Short Treks, which I'm not a Star Trek person, so I'm not sure. And maybe most notably, Fargo.
Mm-hmm.
I've not seen Fargo.
I have not seen it yet, though I've been told that it is a necessary watch that I have to watch.
The show. I've seen the movie, the Coen Brothers movie.
Yeah.
That's a terrific movie.
Yeah, one of these days I'll get around to it. But I mean, good music in the game and very, very varied, which sounds silly, doesn't it? It sounds silly, but it's very transportative. It's very atmospheric.
it doesn't do any more lifting than it needs to.
Precisely, yeah.
And this might be me as a woodwind musician talking, but there is a particular motif that's not really attached to anything. It's not a leitmotif or a character associated with a character or place, but there's a clarinet motif that does some leaps within the clarinet's throat tone register, which is notoriously the most difficult to get a good sound on, but also, personally speaking, my favorite register of the clarinet. And it's not a huge, like, it's not a notey solo, and it doesn't do more than it needs to. It's just a few notes, but it is so lush and beautiful. I don't know the particulars of how they recorded this, but I very much liked the clarinet in this soundtrack.
Kind of hit the nail on the head whenever you're talking about it doesn't do any more than it needs to. You know, it's beautiful. It's like there are some games where like the soundtrack kind of takes over or it like is in the foreground a little too much. This one just, again, it takes you somewhere. And it's respectably done music too. I don't know. There's just so much of this game that I love.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This is definitely, as far as walking sims go, at least so far, one of my favorites that I've played. I think back to other games that I've played too, thinking about how this game makes use of its writing and thematic materials. I think back to games like, oddly enough, Disco Elysium and Yakuza, because playing through this game, in real time, I'm also playing through, actually just finished today, Persona 5. And I know, right? It only took 120 plus hours. But there's, with those games, thinking of Persona 5, Persona 3, there are overarching themes that the series and those individual titles deal with. And a lot of this game, Edith Finch, is storytelling for the sake of telling a good story. Now, it's not entirely that. There is, I do surmise that there is a theme, or at least a couple of themes with this work, but the individual stories are never to that point. They are generally good stories for the sake of being good stories. I don't know, would you agree?
I think the beauty of this game is the fact that, because this is multiple stories in one story, right? I think the beauty is that the individual stories were so well curated, and then they were just swashed together through Edith in such a way. I don't usually like to call anything perfect. That's a word I try to avoid at all costs. This is really damn close.
I think you're on base with that. I try to imagine this articulating and coming to fruition in a different way, and I'm not sure that it could holistically do so without sacrificing something.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like they sacrificed much. You know what I mean? I try to search and figure out what, I mean, maybe the controls could have been, no, even so, if I can say something actually about the controls for a hot second, because I don't think it'll come up in the story, something that I think you probably appreciated about this game is the fact that this game didn't really have a tutorial in each of the scenes, unless I didn't wait long enough for a tutorial to show up. I love the simplicity. I don't know, it just made sense to me. Because you and I talk a lot about bad tutorials.
Yeah, and we talked about a great one on the last episode that you were absent on with Lisa. This and the lack of tutorial, I think, ties into sort of the landscape of the game and the level design, which we might as well pivot to at this point.
Yeah, sure.
It's largely on a track. There's not a lot of needless exploration that you can be doing, because while you're in the house, areas that you can't get to are generally blocked off, and progression is handled through either doors that you can open or passageways that you can get through. We talked about the impossible design on this house. We'll talk about that a little more, but that's how that's handled. When you're outside, there's generally only one path.
It's a really fail-proof way of guiding the character. This game, at least in my opinion, has basically fail-proofed where you can and cannot go because the story justifies your inability to access different areas. It's not like there are some games where it's like, well, why can't I go here? Because we said so. You know what I mean? It's not like there's an invisible wall, and I love that.
Right. Everything does feel diegetic, whether or not it works for you, given how this house is constructed. Your mileage may vary, but everything has an in-universe reason for being on that path, even if it's as simple as, well, that's just the terrain, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another thing that this game does well in terms of like tutorializing or lack thereof is it teaches you as you're walking that lonely road, the only one that you have ever known.
That's right.
And, God, I hate that song. But it teaches you. Slight digression.
Please.
I have found myself much crankier about popular music lately.
Mm-hmm.
But weirdly enough, like if it excluding like quote unquote rock, if it's before the 90s, like I'm all about it. Like the Isleys Brothers came on the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, like I like this. And then like Green Day or I don't know, Finger 11 will come on, and it just, I can't do it anymore. I don't know. Maybe my tastes are changing.
And that's okay. I don't know. I don't not relate with what you're saying. Yeah. No, the way music works in my brain is very strange, but please continue.
Tangent denied.
No, it's a good tangent. I just don't know how to harumph it any further.
So as you're walking through this singular path, the game makes use for the first time, and then it continues to do so throughout, of text on screen sort of coming up as you observe various things or as you pass certain predetermined checkpoints. So as you pass a certain point on the path, text will physically come up on screen. It's probably the least diegetic part about this because, text doesn't just appear in real life, unfortunately. Or if you happen to look at something in the house or outside, that will trigger some text coming. And that incentivizes and teaches the player to explore. And what I like about that is it feels less tedious than something like Life is Strange, where you have to go up to everything, interact with it, and always get some kind of one-liner about how the character feels about it. In this, it's just passing observation, mostly connected to the story at large. You never look at a poster and say like, oh, that's hella cool, like you might in Life is Strange. It's all tangentially connected to the story, and it's passing thoughts, and I appreciate that very much.
Well, and something that happens throughout the game is the fact that we are reading, right? And that's what I think makes this. I'm not throwing a flag on the play per se, though I find it fascinating because yeah, you're right. It having the text pop up like in like the tree line, that doesn't happen in real life. Silly, what are you thinking? But if someone is reading a story and imagining a story at the same time, that could be a way that someone interprets it. And I think that's kind of neat. I'm not saying that that's how it works, but I thought it was kind of an interesting way to marry the two. Like in inhabiting the story as it happens while also reading it. Because not only does the text show up, but the voice of Edith Finch is reading it to you.
Yes, yeah, and we will get to why that is as we progress through the story. And you're right too. Like there are mild elements of the fantastical, to use a word that was used previously in this show, in this episode. There are mild elements of the fantastical, and they're largely done through the reliability and the memory of the narrator. Now that we think about it, right? Thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the first story in particular, the game sets you up with a tone right away that, one, we're going to be flirting with the magical and the mystical and fantasy, But it also sets you up, too, with maybe we should always keep in mind the reliability of who penned what we're reading.
Harumph.
Watch your ass.
I didn't get a harumph out of that guy. No, you summed it up beautifully. Yeah, and we do have a narrator, and it's you.
Well, it's you sometimes, but often when you're going through these vignettes and these past stories, you're reading things that other people have written, which is a really nice touch.
Especially in a certain story that we will get to, that is somebody else reading the story of somebody. Like you're playing as that person, but you hear a voice of somebody who wasn't even related to them reading. It's just so I don't even know if they're aware of how magnificently creative. Like, so much variety.
And, you know, I was going through this game. When I go through games, I tend to just let myself feel however I'd like. And since this game is so short, I replayed a few chapters, and I was really trying to be critical. And I was like, I want to dislike this. So, I mean, I don't, but like, I was like, I want to find something that I don't like. I want to be like the mean teacher with a red pen going through. And there's so little of it. Like, there's not a lot of fluff. There's not a lot of filler. There's not a lot that I feel is handled poorly. It's just good, you know, and whether that I'm sure there are a slew of things that contribute to that. It's short length, the writer's prowess, the graphic designers, surely. But all of these things coming together, I really don't have a lot that I don't like about this. It's just very, very good.
It's not often that you have all of the right elements together at the exact same time. So Michael Eisner, former Disney CEO, and one of my favorite people in that category, because that's a whole nother can of worms for another time. But his philosophy was hiring people who were smarter and better than him at everything. And if you look at what the company did under his leadership, they were basically being green-mailed and then quadrupled in size. So like the company was about to be destroyed, and he brought them back through encouraging the Imagineers and the artists and sparking the Disney Renaissance. What I'm trying to say in all of this is that in this game, it's the perfect team. It's just like, I look at everything and I'm like, where's the leak? Where's the problem? I mean, they've got the Unreal Engine. They've got this like atmospheric music. They have this storytelling that is just so tragic, but not outside the realms of possible. Gosh.
And that's just it, too. The ambiguity of the story's, what I perceive to be the story's largest theme. Well, maybe that's a misrepresentation. What I perceive to be one of the story's characters and themes. Does this curse exist on this family? The ambiguity of that plays so well into how this articulates. And I really want to save that conversation until the end, till we get through everything, this entire journey.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Ben, in terms of just the story as a whole before we dive into the story proper?
I've covered a lot of the folks who are involved in this game, release dates, the kind of general story, which we're gonna go deep because that's what we do. Get over if you don't like it. We talked some development stuff, reception, and you know, we are fully aware that there's plenty of development to go down, and there's all sorts of intricacies with any game. But for us, it's important that we recognize the human element of this, because that's what we all are. That's what we're doing. We're talking about like how this came to be, what it means to us. We compare it, I know you do, Rick, in your own brain, to other games and other walking simulators. Yeah, we're not here to be shirty about it. We're here to digest it in an organic way. So there. I don't know what the point of that was, but anyhow, let's go story.
So this game takes place in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State on a place called Orcas Island. And there's a quote at the very beginning of the game that I just love. It says, "A lot of this isn't going to make sense to you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just going to start at the beginning, with the house." And that's narrated by the titular Edith Finch. It's read by somebody who has a cast, and it's not clear who that is just yet. But upon that narration, we take control of Edith Finch. She is she 17 or 16?
She's
at the start of
17.
this? She's 17. 17-year-old girl. Really brought me back to early high school with those, what do you call those things that were popular with the scene and the scene crowd that they're like fingerless gloves that go up your whole arm.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like, what are those called? It took me right back. I was like, I knew people that wore those.
Fingerless gloves. We're going to look up what their Christian title is.
But between this and Life is Strange, I've just been living in 2011 perpetually for the past few months.
Where are you? And I'm so sorry. I don't know I think they're just called long fingerless gloves.
That's got who invented that? Well, that was invented by John Longfingerless Gloves.
That's right. He had wrists that were as long as most people's elbows. They went all the way back.
So Edith Finch is wearing those, and you are taking control of her. And this beginning, you are walking towards your house. You've lived in this house since you were 11, but you haven't been back since one of your brother's funerals. You mentioned that you never thought you'd come back, but you've got some questions about your family that the house is going to help you with. And another key thing here, too, that I think is just devilishly interesting is you mentioned that you're afraid of the house.
You do, which, to be honest, when I was at first blush, I was like, what is this spooky? Am I going to be spooked? And I wasn't, which is fine. It did something better in this case. And yes, it was Brother Lewis's funeral. And if we refer to the tree, Lewis lived to be 22 years old. The oldest brother, if I'm not mistaken, of you and your siblings.
Your mom left you a key. She said you'd know what it was for. You don't. Which, great start. I love it. There's another quote that I like a lot here that said shortly after entering the house, gosh darn it, I lost it again. Ben, you've got it up. Would you like to read it?
I absolutely would love to read it. Well, and allow me to just throw in some quick filler. So we approach the house. We can't get in through the front door, which I actually didn't try. I don't know about you. I went to the side door first and went in through the doggy door immediately.
Yeah, I think we're good little gamers and we're trained to sort of explore a little bit.
But Edith says, crawling through the doggy door used to be a lot easier when I was 11. That was the quote, right? I'm kidding. She talks about how the power was shut off the night that we left. And then she says, shortly thereafter, going from the garage into the kitchen for the first time in years, I felt like I was home. But instead of a family, there were just memories of one.
Yeah, there are a lot of little lines like that permeate this journey that are just they're so good. They're so fitting. They're not overly pretentious like when I'm speaking sometimes. They get to the meat of the thought, and they articulate it so well.
And not to go there, but after my dad died, visiting the house that my mom was no longer living in, this game literally took me to that point in my life. Walking into an empty house where I don't even know if the heat or the air conditioning was running, and it's just like this, like you could hear the wind. This game kind of smacked me upside the head that way, But this statement, instead of a family, there were just memories of one. Whew.
There's a piece that I played on one of my doctoral recitals. It's a chamber piece called "Staying the Night," based off of a poem by the same name, and the author of the poem lost his sister to cancer, and he talks about going back to her home. And one of the lines that he uses is, "Nothing can now be ruined."
Yeah, I don't want to say it's like that, but
I think about it a lot. I had to read that poem before performing. It was fucking hard. Anywho's, so most of this house, okay, we said that we would get into the house. This house is so fantastically and impractically large and twisting. It's I simultaneously think that this might be a TARDIS for fans of Doctor Who. You know what a TARDIS is. It might be a TARDIS where it's bigger on the inside. And then I am also thinking, now that I'm approaching my 30s, as I'm sure you are as a homeowner, Ben, the amount of work that they've done on this house, they must have been fantastically wealthy.
Well, I think, so here's the thing, is that we have Odin, right, who tried to bring the house across the ocean. This is somebody who clearly, I think it actually could be the opposite. I think that this is an individual who probably built almost everything by hand themselves. I mean, if you look at all of the people in the house, they're all very handy, hardworking folks. And my money's on the fact that they probably just kept building and expanding, and especially because a lot of the things that are built in the house were customs, right? Because I don't think...
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
That's my thought, is that Odin probably came over with nothing and was like, well, we lost the house, time to build a new one, and just went bananas.
And I get the sense that Edie was the same way, because I know it's mentioned that she built some of this stuff too. But all this to say, the inside of this house is large. When you go inside, it's very clear that nobody has lived here in a while, and that the exit of the house was rushed. That is all clear. There are dishes everywhere. Things are in disarray. It's dusty. The lights are off, etc. It's sprawling. There's a lot of secret passageway, a lot of rooms, and it's also quite tall. A lot of the keys are actually sealed up. A lot of the doors
Yes.
are actually sealed up. Yeah, I'm trying to read 5,000 words as I speak. A lot of the doors are sealed up. This is partly due to the developers wanting to kind of keep you on a path and not overwhelm you, which would be annoying if it weren't diegetic.
I was just going to say, and they make it part of the story. The doors aren't sealed just to be sealed. It's not like it's an impossible door to open because the developers are like, no. It's like your mom sealed the doors, did she not?
Yeah. And the key that your mom gave you actually opens up this fake diary that is actually a handle, and it lets you into a sealed off room. Now, here in my notes, I have something that I just want to say now. Half of the time, as we progress through here, it's perfectly fine, dear listener, to just assume that we're going from room to room through secret passages. Like, unless we mention otherwise,
yes.
That's pretty much what you're doing the whole time. And it's kind of cool, but we just didn't want to say, and now we go through this secret passage, now this one, and this one.
Because it basically all is, with the exception of when you first enter the house, go through the living room, the foyer, and get yourself to the second floor. Then from that point on, you are crawling through little hidey holes and little cubbies and little nooks and little crannies and little, how many other little things? I like the eyebrows Rick is making at me.
Speaking of rooms, though, our first room that we are able to get into is Molly's room. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Let me find Molly's room.
I just told you it's through that secret passage.
Dun, 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 dun. Is it not Walter's room first?
I thought it was Molly's.
I think technically we get to Molly's through Walter's.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I know I'm 100% right, so feel free to take it away.
So I believe that Walter's room is the only one that was open, because Edith says, I spent a lot of time playing in Uncle Walter's room, and that's the one that has like the fish and the whales on the wall, right? If I'm remembering correctly. And then it says, I think my mom sometimes regretted not sealing it up. So we get into Walter's room first, and exactly what you said, Rick. Edith must use the key on the book, revealing a handle to a secret entrance, to which Edith says, turns out my mom was really good at keeping secrets. By the way, that was me making fun inaccurately. The voice acting in this game is very good. Because there's a lot of bad. I think there's a lot of bad, and this one is much better than some past games we've played. You know, like the cat.
Rita Tickle.
That was, I feel bad that I just, nope.
I like that game too, but you are right. A lot of the voice acting here, what sold it to me is that it's believable. It's not overdone. It is not too dramatic. It's not. There's no histrionics.
It's very believable. It's nothing really, with the exception of one voice, which we'll get to. Most all of them are very normal and believable. Rick, I liked that dance.
It's because as I was speaking, I couldn't remember the word histrionics, and then it came to me.
Now we're both going to dance, and you all can just imagine it. All right, moving on. So then Edith says, and I love this line, which is right after my mom's good at keeping a secret. Now it was time to find out what Mom had been afraid of, which, starts to play with the territory of the curse language, I think that we'll get to later. And then, she's talking about how she's going through the passageways and sees that her brother had been there before her. And she says, and I love this, reading this, maybe it sounds like I had a plan, but I had no idea what was behind that door. And that's when we get into Molly's room, which is, exiting the secret room because, I don't think you can find Ryan Miranda homes with this kind of these kind of passageways.
Yeah, not in this economy. Molly's room is pretty much just a cliche young girl's room. There's some drapery on the bed. It's pink. There are some toys hither and there. Molly would have been your grandmother. She died at 10 years old in 1947, and this is the first of the stories that you play through. And as I mentioned before, it sets up the sort of tone of this wherein we are reading narrations. Well, I should say we are reading writings and diaries from either the individuals about whom we are learning or those close to them. And it's also setting up this sort of fantastical adjacent scenery and imagery. So what happened with Molly is one night she was sent to bed without supper, as was the norm when you're trying to raise children back then. Not super cool to do now, I don't think. And she was super hungry. So she walks around her room and the upstairs just eating things that she finds. Like she eats toothpaste. She eats berries from mistletoe. She thinks about eating her goldfish.
I mean, I've been that hungry at 10.
Yeah, and that's just it, is this is the writing of a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So that plays a part into what's about to happen because you see a bird outside of your window. You can't get out of your room, by the way, because Edie, which is Molly's mom, has locked the door. Probably because Molly was being a normal 10-year-old, and so she was like, time to punish the child. So you can't get out, but you see a bird outside of your window, and you approach it.
And after approaching, you jump out and, quote, as Molly says, "I was a cat." And you, as Molly, have to follow the bird, playing as a cat now.
This was so cool. Like the first time I did this transition, so cool.
I was blown away, and because I didn't, with any of these games, I really try not to like read or watch anything at all. And like flying out the window as a cat, I was like, oh, like it was almost Miyazaki level with the kind of like, there's no explanation. It's just like the imagination of a child that's untainted. Like so fantastical. I know we've said a lot, but it really just kind of goes that way.
Putting a veto on that word right now, are we?
No. It's staying for the night. But you have to chase the bird. And Molly says, and again, this is Molly narrating now, "I tried to be quiet, but the bird was really scared. Mom and Dad didn't even look at me. I jumped and I almost got her. I could tell she was getting really tired. Now I was up in the big tree. I promised Dad I wouldn't climb it anymore, but all I cared about was eating that mama bird." Eventually you catch the bird and you eat it. And then what happens?
Then you turn into an owl and you're flying around catching rabbits. This girl is vicious, man. She just has no remorse. She's eating bunnies whole. The controls frustrated me here just a little bit.
That's understandable.
Just a tad. Just a little bit. And then it gets to the point that I think I would probably say, like, if there's anything to redo in this, it would maybe be this part, but I found it hilarious because out of nowhere you turn into a shark, but you're not in the water. You kind of turn into a shark in a tree, and then you just roll down a hill.
Don't you know where sharks are born?
It's the stork, right?
Yeah,
He drops them in the tree, and
in
then
the tree.
It was very reminiscent to Goat Simulator to me.
Yes,
because
yes, it was.
Because like what you are seeing should not be, and you're just flopping and flopping. But you go and you roll into the ocean, and you're eating seals, and then this part's interesting. You hop out into a lighthouse, or I think it's actually a boat, as a sea monster. And this is actually a sea monster that was drawing a poster in your room.
I loved this. The music that plays while you are the sea monster looking for humans to eat is It Came Upon the Midnight Clear, if I'm not mistaken, as sung by Burl Ives, of all people. Really cool. Which, by the way, if you think you like It Came Upon the Midnight Clear, I'm either about to make it better or worse. The words really don't quote scripture much at all. They're mostly about the Mexican-American War in the middle of the 19th century. Digressing. Really interesting because the words are actually dark and heavy while you're consuming these people on this boat. I was shocked. I was not ready for any of this.
Yeah. You're eating these people, and you keep talking about how nothing satisfies your hunger. There's a drunk. I think the person piloting the boat is drunk because he's singing very drunkenly, like "What would you do with a drunken sailor?" Which makes me think of Dwight every time. But you get an achievement if you let him finish the song, which I think is really cute. Like, I'm not against achievements, but I thought that was cute. But you eat all of them, and then you say how you smell something really tasty, and you follow the smell, and you go into a pipe, and you're going through, and you come out of a toilet, and suddenly you're in your house, and you find your room. And at this point, you sort of change back into yourself, and you're afraid of the monster, and you say, like, I know I smell delicious, and you're like freaking out, and that's where the diary ends. So this sets up the precedent that, we know Molly died. She died that night. It clear, like, that didn't happen. We know that. That's just, again, it's this, how reliable is the narrator? And then juxtapose that with how can we have fun creating a level. What probably happened was she ate that stuff and got poisoned.
I mean, toothpaste is known for, killing people when consumed in large quantities.
I think, are mistletoe berries poisonous?
Mistletoe, yeah. Poisoning can occur if you drink tea created from the plant or the berries. So I'm going to say yes. If ingested, can be harmful to humans and pets. She ate a lot of them, and she consumed the toothpaste. And she ate, like, old carrots out of her gerbil's bowl. So,
yeah.
Not great.
So that's very unfortunate. And I want to put this pin, too, in all of the listeners, is keep in mind that we're going to mention this as we go, probably here and there, but Edie, that is to say Edith's great-grandmother, Edie vehemently believes that the Finch family is cursed. Vehemently believes. Edith is unsure, that's why we're here. Her mom, Dawn, does not believe that, but there is a curse on the family, and I want to challenge you as a listener to think whether there is a curse or if the belief in one caused irrational action. Prefacing that right here, because Ben and I will talk about that, and I'm very excited.
Yes. So, after we're done with Molly saying, and we both know I will be delicious, Edith says, I'm not sure if I believe that at all, but I'm sure Edie would have. Which I just love as the first line out, like, yeah, she would have thought it was real. And then she goes on to say, this will be obvious later, but my mom never told me any of these stories. Edie would have, but mom didn't like bringing up the past, though when we adopted a stray kitten, she was the one who named it Molly.
Yeah, that's a nice touch.
I liked that. I liked that a lot.
We next go into Edie's room. There's not a story here. We get to learn about Odin. So, we can perhaps talk about Odin in a second, but before that, this bathroom is entirely pink shag.
Oh my god, yes.
On the floor, on the toilet. This is monstrous.
Victoria's. Yeah, no, this is a thing.
I was so not okay with looking at this. Sorry, Ben, I interrupted you. What were you? Please.
No,
please.
I was going to say this is a real thing that happens. Like Victoria's grandma, if I'm not mistaken, whole bathroom purple. Toilet was purple. Carpeting was purple.
Carpeting?
If I'm not mistaken.
In a bathroom.
Just like this one in the game.
That's so foul to me.
You're telling me, but, you know.
Ugh. Wild. I like a good shag carpet, but not in the bathroom.
Can I point something out real fast? And I have to put a pin in this part of our conversation. You know, I know we're going to talk about curse later, which, you know, is not part of the story because, you know, you kind of wonder about it at some points. But Edie, right, believes in the curse. Who lived longer than anyone?
I'm going to hold off everything because I think this is going to be a good conversation.
Pen. Okay, let's keep going. Let's go. You're talking about Edie's room.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the story of Odin? Just what happened? You alluded to it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, so this kind of Odin's story, you kind of get the sense that maybe there is something going on with some form of a curse. As Edith says at one point, whatever's wrong with this family, it goes back a long ways. To kind of give the narration that she says, for 500 years, the Finches have been famous throughout Norway for their fortune and misfortune. Odin Finch buries the last victims of the family curse, his wife Ingeborg, how do you like that for a name, and their newborn son Johan. On January 7th, 1937, he sets sail with his family and his house on a boat, hoping to leave the curse behind. But a 40-foot waves off the coast of Washington send the house and Odin to the bottom of the sea. Odin's daughter Edie, with husband Sven and baby Molly, step ashore on their new home, Orca's Island. Odin Finch is the first to be buried in the new family cemetery. His daughter Edie is already dreaming of a new Finch house. Pretty sour start. Also trying to figure out their trajectory coming from Norway to Washington State.
Yeah. Yep, and again, we don't get to play that out. That's just through newspaper clippings and narration from Edith. The next secret passage leads us into a twin room, Sam and Calvin. We're not going to hear Sam's story just yet. What we know about him at this point is that he enlisted at 18 and just never came back. But for now, we go into Fort Calvin that has a sort of space theme. This, you know, Molly's story gripped me in terms of the narration and that aspect of questioning, like, oh, we get to see through the eyes of a child. Calvin's story gripped me because of just how grisly it is. And we learn about Calvin's story through the writing of his brother Sam. And it's very touching. And what happens is that Calvin had always known that he wanted to fly, like he wanted to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
And what happened one day, and this is what you're doing the entire time through this short story, you're swinging on a wooden swing on a tree. And you're going back and forth, and you go so high, and the breeze happens to catch you just right that you loop around the tree branch and get launched into the rocks of the shore, killing you instantly. This triggered some really big fears in me as an adult because, like, it's POV, right? You're through his eyes. And, like, I remember as a kid, whenever the swing would go too high and you would get that momentary
slack
where your momentum is carrying you, but gravity is causing slack in the chains. It brought a pit into my stomach.
I felt it too. It was very retroactively horrifying.
Yeah, this so sad.
Honest to goodness.
Just grim. But that is how Calvin died. And I don't think we mentioned, but just before Ben takes us into Barbara's room, each time you complete a story, you sort of pen a quick little drawing of them in your diary, completing the family tree. This just kind of serves to keep progress, you know, for the gamer.
Gamers are nerds. That's a joke. Look at me. Anyhow, I love the fact that it's narrated by Sam. I love the fact that, in contrast to Molly's story, it's very quick. It's very fast. And again, the variety of people telling stories, it's just so good. moving on to Barbara's room. Edith, on her way there, says, she finds a secret passageway, pushing aside a slide of fake books against each other. Opens it. Yeah, this is the one that has the butterfly image, and you twist the handle and push it. Really cool. And she says, the passages were a pretty tight fit. They'd obviously been built for smaller hands and bellies. Do you want to reveal this thing now, or do we want to talking about bellies and her belly in particular?
We don't. Well, we could talk about it because you can learn and intuit this as soon as you start playing.
Yes, and that's all I was going to say. We do get to a point soon in the game where we learn that you, as Edith Finch, are pregnant.
22 weeks pregnant.
And to be honest, as I was walking, I look at everything in walking simulators, and I looked down at myself and went, it's either I have indigestion or I got a baby on board, and that is revealed soon. So whenever she says smaller hands and bellies.
Yeah, that's a nice little line if you're replaying this.
It's cute. Barbara's room. Edith says, growing up, I always thought of Barbara as a child star. I never thought of how hard it must have been for her afterwards. And, we talk at length about what, stardom does to kids, and Barbara is no exception. She says, of all the stories about Barbara's death, I'm surprised Edie saved this one. She opens a comic book and starts reading, and then we have Rick's favorite narrator from the whole game.
Old Jack, who is like a B-movie crypt keeper. That comic book is interesting, and it ties into a fan theory that's a little diminutive. It ties into an analysis that I'd like to talk about at the end that I'm not sure about. But this comic book basically plays out after Barbara's stardom. She was a child star known for her scream in horror movies. And at this point, she's like, I don't know, I think it said she's 16. She's kind of a washed up child star. But there's a convention, a horror convention that she wants to go to. She's babysitting her younger brother, Walter, and she's there with her boyfriend, Rick. This is the second game in a row with my name in it, and it's weird. So you're practicing your signature scream, and your boyfriend, Rick, is just being a dunce, trying to help you out.
Stinker.
Yeah. What's cool about this, though, is that this one plays out, one, like a horror movie, like a B horror movie, and two, it's in that comic book style that we talked about earlier. Like, everything is high contrast, heavily outlined. It's literal panels as old Jack, our crypt keeper, kind of takes us through the story. It's very cool. Even to the point where they use the actual theme from Halloween. Did you notice that, right?
Oh, yeah. And I was wondering if they altered it slightly just to get away with anything. So it really is the exact theme.
I checked it. It's the same.
See, and I've never seen that movie, actually, so...
What?
Truly, yeah, no, I haven't seen it.
Oh, man. Oh, we'll talk.
Yeah, I'll probably give it a go someday. Those things, for me, it's like religious horror and like, I don't know, psychological thrillers. Anyway, it is that theme, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And you can't run at all as you're playing as Barbara, which I really wanted to do.
Yeah, just to expedite this a tiny bit, the TLDR is that you hear over the radio there's a cannibal killer with a hook for a hand, and they're on the loose. The hook man invades the home, as you might predict. You are home alone, by the way, because your dad Sven hurt himself on his woodworking equipment, so he's off to the hospital. The hook man invades the home. And you're hitting the hook man to get away from him, and you can't find Rick. What happened? And the big twist at the end is that a bunch of movie monsters, which is purported, it's assumed to be the convention fans, all show up at your house. The comic book presents it as her being eaten, but it's a little bit ambiguous in a good way as to what happens. The Crypt Keeper says that night she played her part beautifully, and what they say is that all they found from her after the fact, after she was killed, was an ear, to which the Crypt Keeper says, Now that's what I call a real eerie tale.
That was horrifyingly accurate. No, that was Rick. That was a little too good.
I don't know about that. That actually hurt my throat a bit.
Rick, I almost want you to go in and play that audio clip just so we can hear them back to back. That's all I'm saying.
Now that's what I call a real eerie tale.
It's left up to interpretation as to what happened. I think the actual thing is that the police took Rick in as a suspect, but it's never really revealed, which does this overarching question, does the curse exist? It plays into that handily, or should I say eerily, because that is an ongoing question as we go through. But Edith does mention that she thought it was weird that this is the thing that Edie chose to keep of memorializing Barbara. And that didn't bother me until today when I started thinking about it.
Tell me more. Why'd it bother you?
Later conversation towards the end.
Okay.
But that comic book sets up an interesting thing that this game literally doesn't do ever again. And I thought this felt a little out of place. And indeed, if you don't go straight for the music box, there's like voiceover from Edith basically telling you to. But you have to get a key from the music box, which you learn through the comic. And that lets you enter the basement, which, again, has like TARDIS-style properties. But inside the fridge in the basement is a literal bunker. We learn that Walter was so traumatized by his sister's death, by Barbara's death, that he lived down there for 30 years.
Ate a can of peaches every day, etc.
Yeah, no, he literally, he lived Groundhog Day. He was living the same day over and over again. We see him eating a can of peaches, as you said, Ben. But every time he's doing it, there's like a new year on the calendar and there's a new popular song playing.
Yeah, it's really, this is all very well done. Yeah, I remember asking Mom once where Walter had gone. She said after Barbara died, he got as far away as he could. If there's a pattern in all these stories, I think it's that none of us got very far. Because he literally lived beneath the house. And that's, Walter says goodbye, and he's been down there for years, 30 years.
Another bit of dialogue that I forgot to write but is really nice is that Walter has a little bit of narration, and he says, living the same day over and over again, even the monster at the door begins to sound friendly and normal and routine. The monster being the curse, of course.
Well, and see, there's that. I was also wondering if it was, the fact that where he lives is rattling every day. I didn't know if it was the train that passed through. But it's
certainly implied to be.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying entirely. This story, it was sad. It's not that I could have done without it. It was just interesting.
I thought it was really sad. What happens is one day he says he wants to live just one new day. Because again, he's been living the same day for literal years. And he says he wants to live just one new day, no matter how long he has left, even if it kills him. And he tunnels out. And as he's tunneling, the subtitles kind of come with the breakage. That's a really nice touch. But as he's coming out, he's walking outside, and I should have had the transcript up. He has a really touching final line or so, and as he's marveling in the light, a train barrels through and runs him over head on.
It's that line that you liked. I think I know which one it is. Oh yeah, here it is. I'm going to appreciate all of it, especially the food. I don't mind if I only have a year left or a month or a single week. I'd be happy with one new day. I can already imagine the sun on my face. I would guess that's the line. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, and as that sun washes over you, that's when the train hits you.
Yep. And it's interesting because, talking about the curse, which I kind of thought, well, curses can be real and they could also not be. He does say the line. That's very curious to me. I know it's out there somewhere. Whatever killed Barbara and Molly and Calvin. Good line.
It's always having the player ask that question. And I'm really relieved, having been through it, that they don't go deeper than that. But as Edith, you take the same path that Walter did, sans train, and find yourself out. That was a bad joke. Outside again, but at night. This is really nice. There's a lot of deep blues and greens here as the color palette changes. You go through the family and the pet graveyards, hearing a little bit more about the history. Edith's mom really wanted to move on from the past, but Edie could not help but memorialize it. Edie is largely the perpetrator of the tales of the curse.
Mm-hmm.
But you see a lot of the graves around here. There's a golden crown on Lewis's tombstone, which is a little bit of foreshadowing as to what's to come.
It is. I liked the line by Edith, which is, what kind of family finishes building a cemetery before starting the house? It's embarrassing for me to admit this, but the pet cemetery made me more uncomfortable than the human one. 3 of the gerbils were mine, and 2 had been my fault. But the first half of that quote, what kind of family finishes building a cemetery before starting the house? Cool scene.
It's drawing attention to the fact that there are some members of the family, i.e. Edie, that are living personifications of the anxiety of death. And in many ways, some might say that they are drawing that energy into their lives.
I mean, law of attraction, right?
Shortly after here, this is where we get to learn about former Marine Sam. This is a really cool and really deeply ironic from a narrative standpoint how it all plays out. But it's really cool aesthetically how they chose to frame this scene. Pardon the pun.
Boo! No, I thought this was really cool. I was frustrated with the controls at first and some of the lack of intuition with finding things, but it's all yours. I know you like this.
Oh, sure. So we learn about this through a Polaroid, and you get to sort of focus your Polaroid camera and take pictures. What's going on is Sam is taking his daughter, Dawn, as far as we know right now. No, because we have the family tree. Right now, Dawn is the only of his children left. And he's taking her out, just him and Dawn, on a hunting trip. And the entire time, Dawn did not want to be there, does not want to shoot deer, things like that. And you can focus the camera and take pictures. I think at one point, Dawn gets the camera and you can take a picture of Sam, taking a piss, which is just a funny little, it's a funny little dialogue. But what happens is you frame a shot of Dawn about to shoot the deer, and then the next shot that comes up, because this isn't all just as you're seeing it, the next shot that comes up is Dawn just sobbing next to the deer's corpse. And Sam is trying to cheer her up, saying, you did well, this is necessary, it's okay. And what he does is he sets up a timer on the camera. And this part, I thought this was super cool because you still have to control Sam as you're walking away from the stationary camera. And Dawn is crying, and as you're walking towards her, she says, "I saw it twitch. I think it's still alive." And this is a classic case of narrative irony where we as the viewers know what's coming. And Sam says, no, that's just natural. Don't worry about it. And Sam gets up there right as the picture snaps. The deer wakes up, and knocks Sam the fuck off the cliff to his death.
And the picture is taken while he is midair. It's brutal.
It's saved. They saved. Edie saved that.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, brother, as we talk out loud, my opinion of something towards the end is changing as we talk out loud. But yeah, just imagine how traumatic for Dawn that must have been.
Well, and then if we consider, and I know we'll talk curse later, but if we consider what she's seen, I would try to hide from it and say it's not real too. That's all I'm going to say.
The next line, can I, as I hand it off to you, can I read what I have written next?
Please.
And this is what's written in my notes. If you are worried that was the most tragic thing to happen in this story, worry no further, because we're about to drown a baby.
Those are good notes. Because we
take it away, Ben.
Yeah. In case we forgot to mention, this is leaving the cemetery. So we left the cemetery. We get to Sam's room. That's where we find all of this. She says, I never met Grandpa Sam, but I think he and my mom had a lot in common. They were both pretty intense. Also, please excuse Blossom scratching at the door. She wants out. I know. Anyway. And the way, this is whenever it's actually revealed to us, is on our way to Sam's room, that Edith is pregnant. Because she's like, I never would have, if there'd been this much climbing, I never would have come when I was 22 weeks pregnant. Dun, 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 dun. Sam's story is beautifully put by Rick. And then as Rick said, yep, we're about to drown a baby. So now we get to Gregory, Dawn, and Gus's barracks. So this is where the three of them live as Sam's children. This part of the story started to get me like more sad. I don't know what it was about all of these together, but it just kind of, I don't know. How did you feel approaching this chapter? Because, you know, we find the letter to Kay from Sam.
Yeah, the letter to Kay from Sam is essentially, it's a divorce proceeding, and we can see that. It's, I don't want to say the writing is amicable, but it's far from confrontational. And essentially, Sam is saying, like, what happened to Gregory is not your fault.
Which is how we lead into what happened to Gregory. It just feels weird to talk about this because of the way it's framed. It's so beautiful and so horrible at the same time. Anyway, so he's in the bathtub. Little Gregory's in the bathtub, and we hear Sam saying, whatever it is he saw, it sure made him happy. I know how silly it sounds that I worried about a baby being too happy, but I felt him slipping away. And this is something that is said because there's a phone call going on while you're playing as Gregory in the bathtub, and there are all of these toys. I don't even know like what the purpose of the games you're playing as a baby are, because you're like controlling a frog and there's a whale in the bathtub.
I think it's just, you know, framing it as the general wonder of seeing through a child's eyes. You know, like everything is a fantasy game.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of putting it. And we've got The Waltz of the Flowers by Tchaikovsky playing in the background. It makes it so...
It turns it almost into a theatrical production, because as Waltz of the Flowers is playing, you're controlling Gregory's toys sort of jumping in a synchronized water ballet. His frogs, his little whale, and things like that. But the tragedy comes when Kay is on the phone with Sam, and she turns the water off in the bathtub and steps away.
Mm-hmm.
How this articulates in the gameplay is one of Gregory's toys turns the water back on. Since we're seeing this through Gregory's eyes and he's a baby, what probably happened is he probably somehow did it, but that would be boring narratively, you know? And the water just keeps filling and filling, and eventually Gregory is underwater as a baby, and you're swimming with your toys. And you're swimming towards, they all kind of welcome you towards this hole, the drain, and you swim down it as the waltz sort of concludes, and that's it. It's a very poetic and symbolic way of showing that Gregory drowned in the bathtub, as Kay was on the phone with Sam.
And it's, you know, irresponsibility on Kay's part, sure, but that's what Sam is trying to say is that like it's okay, it's not your fault, we don't understand what he said, and I wish you could have told us about the world he saw. Just all of like this whole scene, just like
it's brutal.
Yeah, it didn't make me feel like languish. There's so much beauty surrounding the death. It's just, I don't know. It was really just something.
What's sad about it is, at least to me, is they're retroactively speaking about it in a way that's so romanticized. Like, if only we could have known the joys that he saw. And they're speaking in such a way because they're so traumatized that their infant son, I mean, if we're just speaking factually, drowned because they were in an argument. That's rough.
Yeah. Yeah, not only are you, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with divorce, not for a second am I saying that, but like in the midst of your fighting over something that wasn't working out for the two of you, a child lost their life.
And it's something that's so preventable, but at the same time, this and this next story that we're going to talk about, or not this next one, but one of the ones coming up, it's so preventable, but it's so, I don't want to say normal, but it's based in reality.
Yeah, and I will say, and I would love to just put a bow on Gregory with this, and I'll volley Gus to you. What is such a fear of children under the age of 5, but being sucked down the drain? And here was Gregory embracing it almost. Like, wild. Just wild.
Yeah, so that takes us, that's number 2 of Sam's children, Dawn, Gregory. And now we're moving to Gus. This is the one that you said that you liked a lot, right?
Visually and from a prose standpoint.
So the voiceover that we're getting is actually not from Gus. It's a poem written for Gus, about Gus, by Dawn. And Gus, did you catch Gus's age when he died?
Gus's age. It looks like he was 13.
That tracks, because he's a rebellious little guy, and what's happening is this during Sam and Kay's wedding, or is Sam getting remarried? I missed that part.
I am looking.
Or is it an unrelated wedding?
I thought it was I thought one of them was getting remarried, and I thought that's why there was the angst.
Yeah, I guess it's neither here nor there. He was going to be angsty regardless because he's a teen, but there's a wedding, and you're sort of, as Gus, on the outskirts flying a kite. You don't really want to be a part of it. You're flipping people off when they try to call you in. It's very of the age that Gus is. And you're flying the kite with your controls, and you're flying into words as they come up and as the poem is narrated.
It is, in fact, Sam getting married again after the divorce.
And as you're flying into these words, they're all kind of clustered together, and when you run into them with your kite, they form the sentences. And what happens is a storm comes in, and people are trying to go for cover, and the storm is kind of blowing with your kite. That's how this articulates in this particular vignette. And I mean, essentially, to boil it down to what happens, you get pummeled and impaled by debris, and that's ultimately what kills Gus.
The way that they set this scene was very striking with the building storm. I don't know, there's something about it that just fit. They really nailed the 13-year-old rebellious kind of thing.
So what made this one a favorite for you?
I just like the fact that, like, it's so creative. Like, the words end up being part of the debris with the tables, with the tents. Like,
that's such a nice touch.
The wedding is going wrong, and it's going exactly the way Gus wants it to, basically. Like tents blowing away. The wind picked up, and panicked geese appeared and quickly went. But all that the humans did that day was go inside the tent. The rain came down in buckets, but no one seemed afraid. The nature might destroy the tent our father crudely made. The thunder sounded much too close and full of angry power. but all my father said to this was make the music louder. Yeah, it's intense. I have a thing for poetry like this.
It's such a raw and intimate form of poetry because it's from a teen, so just laying her feelings bare, memorializing her dead brother, which is not something that anyone should ever have to do as a child.
No, yeah, this was just, and I don't know if this one hit me as strong as it did because of everything else that preceded it, but man, yeah, this is the pinnacle for me. But this I liked this. This was creative.
So the next stop is Dawn's room. Not a lot of Dawn's past is revealed here. We learn that Dawn was, we can intuit that she was quite smart because she had a Post-it note on her table that had like just a list of things that she might be interested in majoring in. And I was like, I had the thought to myself, like, damn, like if only I were smart enough to just have several things that I could have done, you know?
Some people, I just, you know.
But we learn later that she is an academic and she has at least one book published on teaching. But she met your dad, Sanjay, in Calcutta while teaching English. We learn that. But that's all we learn right now, because we're going up to a new addition to the house of Milton's castle. It's just said that Edie had it built. It doesn't really go into detail how. This is a really neat part because the game's implication, and indeed Dallas's words in interviews, have canonized this, that Milton is the king from the Unfinished Swan.
Of course he is.
And that's so cool because as you walk in, you see the white canvas with the black splotches from the Unfinished Swan. You see the golden footprints, and the theme starts up.
This was really cool to me. The canvas, there are other parts of like the atmosphere in the background that show up. There's different, different. What's the word I'm looking for? I didn't write it, but I'm trying to remember what it is. Different obstacles, different things you interact with in the game are like all throughout the place. And as I was walking towards his room, I just saw the crown, and I was like, and the mustache, and I was like, oh, I forgot about that.
You learn of Milton's story through a flip book. What I thought was nice about this is you could alter the speed of how you're flipping through this.
I didn't
know
flip that.
Yeah, you could flip a page at a time if you wanted to. It's not just a click and flick, you know?
I didn't know that.
It's not your classic click and flick.
Mm-hmm.
If there's one thing about this show, it's that you can't overdo the click and flick, and they don't do that here.
Keep saying that. I like this.
Yeah, it's starting to lose meaning, or take on something new. But the thing, Milton went missing, and nobody knows how. But his flip book tells you of the story where he paints the portrait, the entrance into the castle, and he just steps in, which is the premise, sort of, as we learn from Terry Jones. It's Terry Jones, right? Not Terry Gilliam. For the Unfinished Swan, the Monty Python member. It's Terry Gilliam, I think. As we learn, that's how the king came to be in that area. That's how you, Monroe, and the Unfinished Swan go in. You find the magic paintbrush and you just step right in. What I love about this, and why I love that the creator said canonically that Milton is the king in the Unfinished Swan, is it's creating this sense of towing one foot is in reality and the other foot is in fantasy. We don't know what is true and what's not anymore. Everybody believes Milton's gone, but Milton stepped into a painting. That's fantasy. But we also know that Molly probably just ate stuff and died, or did she? And is there's a curse, or is there? And it's setting this story up shrouded in beautiful ambiguity. in a way that is so satisfying, and I'm so happy they didn't feel the need to clarify, because we're getting to the end now, so we could say that it's not clarified, and that's good.
Yeah, they just let it happen, and they don't give too much of the unfinished swan away. You know what I mean? It's like, here's this thing, and then you step out of Milton's tower, and that's that. It's cool.
So Ben, do you want to take us into Lewis's room to start, or to at least start it? Lewis's room is largely, along with Gregory, regarded as like a fan favorite. And I must say, this is my favorite little story as well.
Is his story is your favorite?
I cannot choose another one. Yeah, it's got to be this one.
That's fair. That's fair enough. Lewis lives in a boat that was somehow embedded into the house. I thought that was kind of fitting because Lewis, I don't want to say he's the most imaginative, but he's very plagued. God bless him. Mom definitely blamed Edie, but I think Lewis blamed himself. After he graduated, he just spent more and more time in his room until Mom got him a new job at the cannery. So Lewis works in a cannery, what we learn, where he is in charge of using a machine to cut off the heads of fish and throw them onto a conveyor belt to, I'm presuming, make canned tuna or some other kind of fish. Everyone always told me to stay out of Lewis's room except Lewis. Lewis's room smelled very, very familiar, and there's like paraphernalia everywhere. That part of him lived on. There's as it says, a PS1 reminiscent gaming console, so you kind of get a sense that he was a late 80s, 90s kid.
Yeah, there's like a legalize it poster. There's a literal bong with weed, I think, still kind of, or at least keef kind of scattered around the table.
Oh, absolutely.
This is, we're not getting Lewis's narration on this. We're getting a psychiatrist's narration. Lewis's job at the cannery was steady, but it was monotonous, and this is compounded with the fact that he was seeing a psychiatrist for substance abuse. And the thing that makes this so tragic to me, and I think anybody that knows or has personally been through substance abuse can vouch for this, is that there are countless tales of people who struggle with addiction, who get clean and struggle with the monotony of sobriety. And it's not unheard of for that to end with the taking of one's life, which is, not to spoil what we're about to talk about, that's what happens here. Yeah.
And it is, as Rick spoke about earlier, it is Lewis's psychiatrist who is reading this portion of the story to us, who says, "Dear Mrs. Finch, as Lewis's psychiatrist, I can understand your desire for an explanation. As I see it, the trouble began in January, shortly after we convinced your son to seek treatment for substance abuse. Newly sober, I believe Lewis first noticed the monotony of his daily life. He kept working at the cannery, but he withdrew part of himself in sessions. I saw the same behavior." So at this point, we're just cutting off the heads of fish while this is going on. And then to the left of you cutting off the heads of fish and putting them on the conveyor belt, there's a man that it's implied that you're supposed to walk him through the labyrinth, kind of imposed over the scene.
I really felt like this was the most creative in terms of gameplay articulation throughout what goes on. And I won't interrupt Ben to explain this further as he goes through the story, but you are at first divided left and right with your control scheme, your WASD keys. You're walking this man, and in reality, with your mouse on the right, you are continuing to chop the fish heads. And as you continue to engross yourself away from the mundane reality that you live and into the inner mechanisms of your imagination, the fishery part, the cannery part, is always there, but it gets smaller and smaller, and the imagination part gets bigger and bigger.
It's very creative.
It's masterfully done, and I think I think it's articulated well given the subject matter, for somebody that is getting clean and their perception of life as they go through it. I really just cannot give enough kudos to them. This is so well done.
It's mechanically, it's very pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time, because your one hand is in charge of the fish, the other hand is doing the labyrinth. And as this happens, the psychiatrist says his mind began to wander. I asked him to describe it. He said he started small, imagining a labyrinth. He'd feel his way about it. Then something moved, bats and toads and things that have not names. He knew it was all in his head, but he took it very seriously. I'd hoped he'd find himself, but he found something more. I could read literally all of this, and I encourage you to play this or read it yourself, but ultimately, the labyrinths keep evolving, and Lewis really creates his own little world, where he is in charge of everything. He holds elections, he gets elected, everyone loves him, everyone celebrates him.
At one point in your mind, you even view yourself sort of as an out-of-body experience, just going through your daily life motions, when in reality you're contributing nothing. There's not even any fish anymore. You're just doing the motions of the chopping, which contrasts so brilliantly. It's such a sad scene and realization for someone to go through, but the fanfare that's going on as you get elected king, it's one of those like whiplash emotional moments that's just, it hits just right for me.
Oh yeah. And it ends with you at first person as Lewis at this point. And the psychiatrist says that the palace was packed with his companions, including the wise Calico, who insisted on advising him. The prince or queen, I loved that. The fact that you could choose whether Lewis was interested in a prince or a queen, waited holding his crown. There was only one thing left to do: bend down his head. Where you're about to be coronated is actually a guillotine, but everyone is still around you celebrating. But as you're bowing your head, you briefly catch a glimpse of the Cannery's caution line, and then the scene cuts to black. Ooh.
And the way the psychiatrist frames it is as an accident. I think I don't see much wiggle room in the interpretation here of his perceived banality of life, in his new sobriety. This is just my reading, but I personally don't see a lot of wiggle room here. His perceived banality of life caused him to take his own and die by suicide.
My brother was really cool. I wish you could have met him. On the way back from Lewis's funeral, my mom told me to start packing. She waited until the day before we left to tell Edie. I'm not sure if she wanted to make it easier or harder.
Yeah, this was the breaking point for Dawn, Edith's mom. At this point, she wants to get out of Dodge. Just get out of the house.
Which is fascinating, too. And then we find ourselves in Edith's room. I wish we'd stayed, but I understand why we left. My mom ended up leaving everything behind. What happened that night had been coming for a long time. Maybe it should have come sooner, but it had to end one way or another. All that's left now is to tell you about that last night. And that's kind of the pivot into the grand finale.
Yeah, and that's largely what this is. So you were in your room, and you were sort of going through your last night there. You're having dinner, and your mom and Edie get into an argument, because at this point it's just the three of you living there. And the argument is based on Edie wants to stay, and Dawn wants to leave. And they fight, and Edie says that she has something for you, and you sort of go through these, again, fantastical passageways that she says that her mom doesn't know about. And it was at this point where the game starts to explain the curse origins, but it's handled so well. What happens is you find this book that Edie wrote about this fantastic earthquake that happened. And the earthquake was so severe that the tide went out, and the old house, which I am now realizing we never mentioned, and that is a crime. The old house was constantly visible.
I mentioned that he was bringing it across the sea in the 40-foot waves.
But I don't think we mentioned that it was constantly visible. Like, it had sunk, but present day you could see it out there.
We did not mention that. You're correct.
That was very, very much a physical, manifestation of a metaphor for the theme, the weight of the past, right? That's sort of Edie's whole deal. And one night the tide draws out because of the earthquake and she can walk there. So we're walking there as Edie towards the house. And it's at this point as a viewer, I was like, no, they're going to try to explain every little thing. But what happens is Dawn catches Edith reading about this and yanks the book, the journal, out of Edith's hands. So Edith doesn't get to read anymore. And what's super cool that I just saw today is that when this happens, since you're playing it as a flashback, one of the pages is completely blank because Edith never read it, so she doesn't know what's there. What a cool touch.
Yeah.
But you don't get to finish reading it because it gets ripped and, Dawn confiscates it. But that's the last night of the house. You leave right there. There's a line where Edie says, Edith deserves to know these stories. And Dawn says, my children are dead because of your stories. Big, big line.
It's a big line.
So they leave. Edie stays behind and dies before the next morning when the nursing home folk arrive. And that's the last night in the house.
Kicked and I screamed. Mom dragged me to the car. Never saw Edie again. Next morning, Van came to pick her up. She was already gone. After that, we moved around a lot. We both tried to make the best of it. After a few years went by. My mom didn't like to talk about it, but she started getting sick a lot. And there's a dandelion's fluff. It's blown away by Dawn's cough. And the scene switches to her sickly hand being reached out to by Edith.
It's kind of implied that her mom passes away of a terminal illness because she gets sick, she gets better, and then she gets deathly ill and passes away. What happens next in the story is, we know that Edith Finch was pregnant, and we have a childbirth scene, which was a little jarring at first because you play as the new life coming into the world, and it's very apparent that you are doing that. Just a little jarring to me was all. But what happens is as the new life comes out of the life giver, there's sort of a flash and we're back to reality as Edith's son. And what it's implied that Edith died giving birth. And there's a quote somewhere, I don't want to take the time to search for it, but Edith says something along the lines of, I'm writing this, but I hope I never have to give it to you because I want to tell you these stories for myself. But if you're reading this, it's already too late.
This journal was supposed to be for you, but now I hope you'll never see it. I just want to meet you and tell you all these stories myself. But I guess if you're reading this now, things didn't work out that way. Everything is so well written in this story.
Yeah, it's full circle. The person looking down at the journal with the cast in the beginning is your son, and he's laying flowers at your grave. And that's where the credits roll. That is the end of the tale of Edith Finch.
I will say one line that struck me that is in this last sequence that I didn't get to read, that just when I go back and look at it, it was the one that hit me last night when I was playing this game. And then I was alone, the last Finch alive. This is amazing storytelling, but it's not just a good story. It's all written well. She wishes him good luck, and exactly that. Credits roll. I love the credits. They're clearly old family photos.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what they are. All of the folks who worked on this game, it's them as children or babies. It's a very nice touch.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the curse in the room?
Let's talk about it. So I mentioned we both mentioned at the forefront of this is not a mystery tale. A mystery requires a secret and a resolution, and this is not that. This is a tragedy. Tragedies don't always end how we want them to. Life doesn't tie up. This reminded me a lot of the ending to The Sopranos. It's the classic finale, the black scene. Everything goes black, and then the credits come up. And people endlessly debate, did Tony die? And, David Chase eventually in the years slipped up and gave a definitive answer, but for years, for over a decade, his stance was it doesn't matter. That's not how life works. Life is going to go on whether Tony got whacked or not. And I don't think the ending doesn't matter here. I don't think whether the curse is real or not doesn't matter. But this notion that life goes on does kind of compound into the fact that this is a tragedy and whether or not the curse was real. So, what's your take? Do you think this curse was real?
You've got my brain going so many different directions talking about the tragedy versus mystery and all that stuff, because it is information seeking, right? Like, we still have a story to tell and to discover, so there's a really strong element of discovery, a little bit of mystery, but that's not the genre. It really, from a story standpoint, nail on the head, tragedy.
Yes, all I meant by it's not a mystery tale is that we are not obligated to see the resolution, is all I meant.
Harumph. The title of this episode should just be Harumph, and then people will click on it and be like, they'll look like the puzzle kid from our puzzle episode. My jury of all things supernatural and beyond this realm, I don't know how I feel about curses as the whole. I can tell you, I think Dawn believed in the curse. And I think Dawn tried to find comfort in literally everything, at every corner, with every solution, to fight the curse, to say, see, there is no curse.
What's beautiful about this is they took it in a direction to where there's not really a wrong answer, right? I mean, one could say that there was a curse, and that's why there are so many coincidental deaths that happened to every single member of the family. My personal take is that the curse was largely themselves. They manifested their own curse. I read it. My initial reading was that Edie largely kept this talk of the curse up and this constant as a means to justify some of their, misfortune. And also there is some backstory that said the Finches were cursed before, they came over. I wonder if that was just put in there to help the ambiguity, but who knows? I think Edie perpetuating this idea that there's a curse, we have bad luck, this is bad, we have bad luck. I really think that largely caused a lot of reckless behavior unconsciously. I mean, certainly some of that presents itself quite well, like with Molly eating whatever she wants, with Calvin swinging in the fence, even with Lewis a little bit. I want to be perfectly clear that addiction is not a choice. It is a condition.
Yes,
yes. But a lot of people with addiction sort of trigger that addictive personality, that response that's built into their brain voluntarily almost, because they just stumble across it, whether they choose to or not. Does that I really don't want to misspeak and give the impression that I'm saying that he chose to have substance abuse issues.
No, you're clear as day as far as I'm concerned. I know you,
but I think that Edie's perpetuation of this curse caused implicit and explicit irrational behavior, which caused caused reckless behavior, which caused maybe risk taking, and any chance they could blame the curse on something, I think they did. I think they were the curse.
There is this thing that we have in the human condition called the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is, there's no way I could ever play this piece perfectly. So what happens? You never play the piece perfectly. There is focus
speaking my entire life, Ben.
You and me both, baby.
Yeah.
It would just get in your own way. But in this case, it's, if you are at the formative age of a small child, of like a let's just say a 10 to 22 year old, like, and I'm not saying 22 year olds are small children, but I'm saying like there's a lot of formative stuff. And if you made it to the 10-year-old point, what I'm trying to say is that Lewis would have experienced the curse talk. Like if Lewis ever would have inquired about Gregory, oh, well, Gregory died because of the curse, and you could hear Dawn being like, cut it, don't do this. And then, oh, a curse. Oh, It makes people, try their luck against fate. It makes some destructive decisions happen sometimes. And again, it makes people say, well, it's going to be bad anyway. I think that the curse is as real as the minds that create it, as in, like, it isn't necessarily real. That's not to say I don't believe that curses can't be real. That's a whole nother conversation for another time. But in this case, I don't think they were cursed. I think that this was some self-fulfilling prophecy mixed with just straight up tragedy. I don't even want to say bad luck. It's circumstantial in a lot of cases. And if you look at the years that a lot of the earlier deaths happened, and the great majority happened, they were in times where you actually did lose a lot of people at an earlier age. Like, people who, I don't know, grew up from the silent generation. How many people have lost siblings at an early age? Like my own dad had a brother born, died at childbirth in like the 50s. So like,
The real curse was the friends we made along the way.
Yes, all of you are listeners and friends. You are the... No.
I'm with you 100%. It's shrouded in such a goddamn beautiful cloud of ambiguity where it could go either way. But I think you and I kind of have the same reading on this. One thing that I just stumbled across literally today.
Ooh.
I want to say the YouTuber's name is Joseph Anderson, but that may be incorrect, so I apologize if I'm misattributing. Their attribution, and this is the last thing I wanted to put a pin in from before, or that I did put a pin in, is that there is an antagonist in this game, and it is Edie. His justifications as I see it, and, I'm also kind of just taking my own observations as well. The obvious one is that Edie was the sole one that's perpetrating this curse. We never hear of anybody else talking about it except for Walter and Dawn. Now, did I misspeak?
No, that's interesting.
Walter, he was one of the first generation, the first of the kids, of Edie's kids, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he's actually...
Because he was Barbara's brother, right?
Molly was born in 1937. Barbara was born in 1944. Calvin and Sam were 1950. Walter was 1952, so he was last.
Oh, okay. So he's a little younger. That's my bad. But it doesn't hurt the interpretation. Edie, with the exception of Walter, is the only one perpetrating this curse. Walter's position on it was even circumstantial, that whether it's there or not, he needs to find out for himself, Dawn is the only other character that mentions it in a real way, and she vehemently denies it. So this reviewer's take was that Edie was the antagonist by keeping this alive, and it's supported largely by that, but also by, remember that comic book that Barbara kept around, or that Edie kept around of Barbara. What a weird memorial for your daughter who was supposedly murdered, right? And they also mentioned that, that's in that comic book, that was obviously drawn by somebody, because diegetically it's a comic book. It's not just a stylistic choice by the graphic designers. And that comic book had an in-depth knowledge of the house, including that secret key in the music box. So the comic drawer, the illustrator would have had to have worked with somebody that knew the house. And at that point, it would have had to have been Edie. Right? It would have Edie or Sven, but there's no logical reason we would consider it to be Sven. It would have had to have been Edie. And that could give the whole thing, like, Edie is continually perpetrating the idea of this curse over the well-being of her family. I haven't decided whether or not I agree with that, because to be perfectly candid, I saw that video about a half hour before we started recording. So it hasn't lived in a meaningful part of my brain. But as we're talking and as we're saying some of these things out loud, it's far from implausible. What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. From Edie's perspective, Odin lived, for the time Odin was born, a pretty full, long life. Okay? No problem there. But Edie's children, one after another, died. Like, Sam lived, and Sam ended up having Walter. they would have had 3 other siblings. So I think from Edie's perspective, it's like it's a low-level miracle whenever Calvin and Sam come into existence. But even then, Calvin, of course, couldn't live. And then we have Sam, who has, these 3 children. And what happens to 66.67 repeating of them? But they die at a young age.
So are you saying that this perpetrating of the curse was like a defense mechanism for her?
I think she could have used it to justify and bring herself some kind of peace.
I'm on board with that. I don't think she was doing was I don't think she was perpetrating the curse with malicious intent. But let me challenge you with this observation. Does an antagonist need to be intentionally malicious, or do they simply work against the quote-unquote good outcome? So put another way, can Edie be the antagonist even though she was working within what she perceived to be best intentions? My answer is I think so. I'm not saying that I think that she necessarily is the antagonist, but just as the protagonist isn't always the quote-unquote good guy, I don't think the antagonist needs to be the quote-unquote bad guy as well, I
smell what you're stepping in, I think. And I don't think she is bad, but as somebody who probably perpetuated this curse to her whole family, that's not going to help anyone's mindset. I mean, like, to kind of throw like a psychological thing into this, like a negative body imaging issues that exist. It doesn't matter, like, if there's a parent who feels bad about the way that they look, it doesn't really matter how much that parent will say to the child, "You're beautiful." The child will learn from what they see. So what's happening here, in my humble opinion, and I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any kind of degrees in this stuff. I just, I quote, I read, end quote, and observe. In this case, I think that at least with some of these children and people, it really was, I don't know. I'm like looking at the fact that like Gus was born before Gregory. Gregory died while Gus was alive and while Dawn was alive. So like everybody has, not only has Edie seen all of this death, but everyone has seen each other's deaths, and that change just continues. And so, curse must be real. It's only a matter of time until the axe falls. That's how I feel.
Yeah, only a matter of time before the axe falls. I'm sure that was a sentiment that was just baked into her entire being, right?
It had to have been. I mean, but the thing that I love is that she lived as long as she did. What?
Yeah. It's interesting that she didn't pass away until Dawn and Edith left. It was right as Dawn and Edith chose to say, no, this curse doesn't exist. We're decided and we're gone. And that's when Edie passed away. She was quite old, but it's also, hell of a timing, right?
What she had believed for her entire life was no longer believed in, quote unquote. And she dies with that.
Yeah. I think the sign of good writing, not just video game writing, because as we talked about this time and time again on this show, video games often get called a lower tier of writing than, literature and film. Not unfounded, but I think the sign of good writing is the ability to interpret in more than one concrete way and have it remain plausible, right? I'm not saying that every single piece of writing out there has to have multiple interpretations and it all has to be right or else it's not good writing. Not what I'm saying, but I think given the subject matter and what the writers are going for, the fact that it doesn't have a conclusive, yes, the curse was real, no, the curse wasn't real, I think that's the sign of maturity in prose that, to be frank, we don't often see in video games.
I think you're right.
I'm Rick, but I was being frank for a moment.
That hurt me.
That's my favorite dad joke. Yeah, I think that about sums it up. That is the fantastic game, What Remains of Edith Finch.
Absolutely.
Any parting thoughts?
I didn't think I would like it this much. I didn't know what to think going into this game, and I loved it. Just loved it. What about for you?
I'm 100% on board with you. I knew I would like it, but I came away. This was a terrific experience. Safe recommend by me. I mean, buy it. I think it justifies full price for. I mean, what would that be, like $20 at most?
It's robbery in a lot of ways because it is so artful.
I know for a fact I paid like $5 for it when it was on sale. It's well worth the money, and it's only 3 hours long, if that.
If that, yeah.
Yeah, our episode is practically as long as the game.
And I didn't think we would record this long either, but it deserves it.
Truly, I thought this would be much shorter, but everything felt organic, and I think the discussion was warranted. This is the kind of stuff that I like talking about.
Me too.
Well, we like talking about it. If you like hearing it, we appreciate ratings and reviews. We did get a new rating, actually, another 5-star rating, not to pat ourselves on the back.
Who?
Not to toot our own horn, but no, I don't know who, because they didn't leave a review, so I can't read it, but thank you.
Thanks.
But yes, please do that. Share our stuff if you are so inclined with a friend who might also enjoy our banter and conversation. We are on social medias in a couple ways.
Yes, we are. In fact, I'm going to our Instagram right now. Not that it matters, because I'm not going to show you, because you can't see this. I'm going to pretend that it's a commercial, though. I'm going to show it to Rick. We've got Pixel Project Radio Podcast. That's how you can find us on the Instagram. Wow, that looks really trippy, doesn't it? That's the screen protector. Anyway, yes, find us on Instagram at Pixel Project Radio Podcast. You can email us at pixelprojectradio@gmail.com.
Yep, yeah, certainly not a popular option, but it exists nonetheless.
Use it,
nevertheless.
Sorry. Use it.
We have a Twitter that we are more active on. You can find us at Pixel Project Pod. Twitter and Instagram is where we generally hold our audience participation things. And finally, we have a Discord that is in our bio. It's been going for about 6 months now. It's going pretty strong. It's a good time. It's laid back. We have good conversations, good recommendations. Come hang.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to stick around and listen. As ever, my name is Rick Firestone.
My name is Ben Bugale, and we'll see you next time.